one of the icebreakers was that you were supposed to share amongst yourself and a little bit of an anecdote of, in the last 24 hours, what did you survive?
Oh, in the last 24 hours?
In the last 24, she put graduate school, so she finished her graduate school in the last 24 hours. But essentially, we're all here, so we all survived, right? We all have that one Darwinian role, which is to survive. It all starts from our infantile development. From when we're drinking milk, we learn life and death. If we don't drink that milk, we're gonna die. We subconsciously know that as an infant. We know about pleasure and pain when they give us a pacifier, and that pacifier helps us to calm down. We know about pleasure and pain. We also know about security and comfort. If we're not coddled, if we're not protected, we lose our intensity to survive. So everybody here is surviving. Everybody, even prison inmates, are wanting to survive. They don't want to be on death row. They want to survive in that most harsh condition. They're wanting to survive. But how many of us can say we're thrivers? How many of us can say that we are truly living? We have all the tools, we have all the sources, but not very many of us are tapping into that. We have red flags, such as somebody that's getting under our skin. That's one of the greatest red flags right there for self-reflection. We have that one family member or a whole side of the family that we have feuds with. Those are great flags right there, because we all have that. We can't get rid of them. They're always there, right? We have all kinds of tools with us. We have joy, we have fear, we have anger, we have angst. I got all that from the Pixar cartoon. Have y'all seen that Inside Out? It was brilliant. It was one of the first animations that actually, you did, yeah, it was one of the first animations that actually said emotions are okay. Most of us have been raised to suppress at least one of those emotions. And when you think about everybody's strife to find happiness, only one of those emotions is joy. Everything, it sounds pretty bleak to me if we're only striving for happiness and one of our emotions is joy. But to be able to tap into those emotions, those are our messengers. Those emotions are telling us and guiding us how to be creative instead of reactive. But since we're conditioned to react, constantly react, fight or flight or freeze, then we're not being self-aware. As humans, it's really a gift of ours to be self-aware. As animals, not so much. They're in the wild, they have to be reactive. So I'm here to non-dogmatically tell you, encourage you that self-awareness is the panacea of the world's problems. I really believe that. Take, for instance, Palestine and Israel. For an individual, a victim in the struggle, the conflict between Palestine and Israel, that individual sees themselves as not surviving. But for instance, what if that individual sees themselves as a survivor? What if they see themselves as a thriver? Wouldn't that completely change the picture? It would completely change the dynamic. Nobody would be fighting out of fear. People would actually have conversation. There wouldn't be too much resistance against each other. I don't know if some of you have heard of pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. That statement is so true. We're sentient beings, we're gonna feel. We have pain. Our body's gonna communicate that with us. But to suffer is optional. Tara Brach, if she was a religion, I would probably be a Tara Brachian, but she's not a religion. But I religiously listened to her podcast, and she gave a wonderful equation of suffering, and she said suffering equals resistance plus pain. And that made so much sense to me because I was born in the war between Iran and Iraq. So I learned growing up to be rebellious, to fight, to defend myself, all equating to resistance, all equating to virtues that doesn't help you survive in an adult world. So you can imagine, I suffered a lot. I suffered a lot because I was completely resistant to the pain of growing up, what I went through, all the trauma. So what if we have self-awareness classes in high school? How would that change the picture? Learning about Christopher Columbus and when he sailed the ocean blue didn't help me when I lost my mother in middle school. How would that change the picture? So we're actually cultivating children to think very dogmatically, very factory-oriented, not being creative, and not thinking outside the box. So they're being put into more resistance. They're being put in corporate positions or even non-corporate positions, but in these cubicles, in these cages, in these one-way mentalities, doctor, lawyer, engineer, just really monolithic environments that causes more resistance. I saw this meme that really resonated with me. It said, Iranians have 3 choices as far as career goes: engineer, doctor, or disgrace to the family. So I oscillate between those 2, or those 3 oftentimes. NCI, National Cancer Institute, defines a survivor as a patient the first day they are diagnosed with cancer. When I got diagnosed with breast cancer at 27, that did not define my status. I was rebelling, I was in denial, I was very angry. And it wasn't until I took a 3-day intensive self-awareness workshop that I started understanding everything that was happening to me, everything that was victimizing me wasn't real. I was victimizing myself, and everything was happening for me, not to me. I realized I got diagnosed with cancer 2 weeks after I landed a job in my career as a cytogeneticist at MD Anderson. So instead of saying, why me, why me, why me, after this intensive workshop, I said, why not? I'm the best candidate for this story, as are you for your story, as are you for your story. So it's really important to be self-aware, because if we're not, then we allow those stimuluses in our environment to attack us constantly, and we're constantly combating. Most patients I know in the cancer advocacy world that I'm very much involved in, the minute they get diagnosed with cancer, they completely change their diet, like obsessively change their diet. So how do you do that? How are you going to really try to survive if you're going to go from one toxic environment to another toxic environment of obsession? Like, if you're obsessively eating healthy, how could that possibly be healthy? How can you eat mindfully without mind-body awareness, without that self-awareness? I always say, if someone is going to drink 5 beers mindfully, consciously, it's so much better than drinking 2 beers unconsciously. Does that make sense? It's very important, you know? I mean, sometimes when I eat chocolate, it's like background noise. Like, I'm it's like eating it. But in France and a lot of parts in Europe, they'll take a little, bit of chocolate and indulge in it. Whereas here, I need Sam's, industrial strength, economical size. So with the path of cancer, and I always talk about cancer because that's kind of my excuse to tell my story, my excuse to encourage self-awareness, because self-awareness is a very abstract thought, and it's hard to understand self-awareness without an example. Some people think of self-awareness as, oh yeah, I know I'm beautiful. I look in the mirror all the time. I mean, yes, okay, but there's more to it than that. And with cancer, I mean, you can always substitute the word bankruptcy, divorce, something life-altering for cancer if you don't know anyone that has gone through cancer. But with cancer, there's really 2 paths to be anti-cancer. One is through self-awareness, through self-compassion, and the other is what I said, completely being obsessive and completely being against cancer. There's t-shirts that says F cancer, and I'm like, cancer doesn't really have feelings. So I don't know who you're trying to be resistant to. So I don't go with that notion of thought because it's resistance. I do have this reminder, I'm on notice, just as all of you are, but cancer patients, we're a little bit more fortunate because we get that notice every 6 months when I go in for my checkup. I'm on that notice to be aware, to be present, to be alive, to thrive, to truly live. I'm reading this book right now, Stumbling on Happiness by Daniel Gilbert. It's been really quite interesting. And he talks about the frontal lobe, and that's where our time machine is. That's where we sense the future. So they've had patients that have had accidents with the frontal lobe, and they're perfectly functional. But then when you ask them, what are your plans for tomorrow? They have no sense of time. It's really interesting. And just that anxiety for the future holds us back. That notion that we try to, preclude the future. We're not trying to forecast the future, but we're trying to preclude the future. And that alone creates this environment where we're constantly, he uses the word nexting. We're constantly like, next, what's next, what's next? And in order to be aware so that we can be in the present, we have to be in the now. And it's quite easier to say than do. But with that struggle, self-awareness is the recourse to be creative versus reactive. Because if we're constantly being reactive to the future of what if, we're completely losing sense of what's now. So when I took the 3-day intensive workshop, which a lot of people have a hard time accepting and willing to be open to, mainly because you do have to go into that dark zone that you've been so good at denying and so good at blinding yourself and veiling yourself. But I went there and I was like, they're not gonna break me, I am strong. First day, those life coaches, they are good. They are so good. They know exactly where to push, but that's what they're intending to do. They're intending to unveil you. One of the favorite lines I have from a poem by Rumi is, the seawater begs the pearl to break its shell. So what if we're all pearls? I think we are. I don't believe in evil. I think we're all pearls. We were all born with that one role that we all share, and that's to survive, but we're all pearls. As we grow, we get jaded, we get cynical, and then we just get, all these clusters of mold and moss and stuff growing on us that we don't really reveal our pearl. How beautiful would that be if we could just unshield ourselves? So everyone has a purpose in life, whether you find your purpose, whether you determine what your purpose is, all that's debatable. But not everybody has a mission. For the past 5 years, what has happened to me in being able to overcome cancer, not simply that I'm cancer free, but I'm free of cancer. And there's quite a bit of a difference with that. There's so many people in this world that are living with stage 4, but they're free of cancer. They're living, they're actually living. And there's other people that I personally know that are free of cancer, but they're constantly in the negative and constantly saying, well, cancer did this to me and I'm struggling with the side effects, and I'm, we call it collateral damage, and I have that too, but it's this constant, dance that I do with short-term memory loss, which I've had, but I have my husband to help me, and he completes my sentences. I just look at him and I'm like, that word? And he'll say it. So I'm glad it creates a little bond between us. I'm trying to stay positive about it. But to be in the negative about something that already occurred, you're not in the now. So that's really important. I'll read an excerpt from my book, but there's this thing called mirror neurons that I recently learned about. And I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you're talking to someone and you have your hands folded, and then all of a sudden they're folding their hands, or you do this and then they do it. You know, it's like subconscious. You're not trying to do it, but then you do it. So we have that on an emotional level too. So when we're negative, when we're traumatized, when we're not healing, when we're in pain, we're suffering, all that kind of bleeds into the environment with our mirror neurons. So if you're not going to be self-aware for yourself, at least be it for your community, at least be it for your family. Because when I started surviving, so did my family. It was tough. I mean, I really was resistant to getting diagnosed with cancer. That's not the way I had planned. I was supposed to be married, have kids, have a dog, a cat, you know, maybe a home. I could be a freeloader at times, couch surfing or something. So do we have time? Can I? Okay, I'll read a little excerpt from my book. And the title of my book is This Was No Coincidence, because of all the things that were happening. When life gets complicated, I feel the need to unmangle my thoughts and all the complications by organizing and minimizing. I even thought at one point I was so stuck in this labyrinth of life and couldn't find my way to clarity that my only way was to work at the Container Store, just to feel like the world was orderly. In order to unravel the confusion of what was happening to my friendships and my own survivorship, I organized people and the art of surviving into 3 categories: fearful, superficial, and true. In Cancer Vixen by Marissa Marchetto, she used comic relief to explain how, in her similar experience, cancer highlights the authentic relationships and purges the superficial ones. Once you decide to be a survivor, it's amazing how creative you will get. My analogy is when someone is stranded on a deserted island, there can be 3 types of scenarios. 1, the person who gives up and says, there is no way, I'm going to survive this, so I might as well push my destiny forward and take my own life. 2, the person who is in denial, that they are convinced there are other people on the island, there's plenty of food, and his or her name is God. 3, the person who is very much aware of the reality of what has happened and what might happen, but is willing to get creative and see where his or her destiny truly lies. Once I reached the 3rd scenario, that's when I started getting creative. I got braids because I always wanted braids, but never had the guts to get them. Mainly it was my survivor mode getting creative. I thought this might be a trendy option for women losing their hair to chemo. Usually women shave off their hair around 4 weeks, or even prior to that in preparation. But with this creative trial, I volunteered my head, which allowed me to have fake hair braided to my own for almost 8 weeks. In the back of my hair, it was a little bit loose, so it fell out. And I just kept on walking, and this lady came behind me, and she's like, ma'am, you dropped a braid. And I was like, oh my God, the chemo is working before I even had any injections. Like fell out. So I thought about the 3 people I'd envisioned stranded on that deserted island. Dead fish go with the flow. Rebels go against the current. Survivors accept reality and become one with the water. So the last word that I want you all to leave here with is a term called noosphere. So we have the biosphere, which is biological matter. We have geosphere, which is inanimate matter. Noosphere is an interesting word, and it follows my mission. It's a mental sheath around the world, a conscious awakening that we can, through our mirror neurons, through our own self-awareness practice, can really change the dynamic of this world. Now, I don't think 100% of the world is ever going to reach enlightenment or any of that, and I'm not intending for that by any means. But if I can just create that awakening for myself and the community I live in, then my whole goal of creating a kinder community has been accomplished. Thank you.